Picture this. You're sitting in a studio, live on national TV. The spotlight is on you and the pressure is palpable. But instead of trembling under the scrutiny, you deliver one devastating blow after another, leaving your adversaries speechless and humiliated. This isn't a scene from a drama. It's reality, and it just happened. Karoline Leavitt, a name now echoing across the internet. A woman who turned the tables on liberal reporters in a way no one could have predicted. What caused this moment to unfold? Why did the liberals, who prided themselves on being untouchable, suddenly find themselves backed into a corner? Imagine this. You've spent years building an empire, using your sharp intellect and quick wit as weapons. You've been underestimated, written off as just another political figure with an opinion. But one moment, one carefully calculated response, changes everything. In the middle of a heated exchange on live television, Karoline Leavitt didn't just respond to the attacks. She flipped the script entirely. The reporters, the so-called champions of liberal ideals, were left fumbling for words, exposed in a way that would forever alter their reputations. But here's the twist. It wasn't just a political argument. It wasn't just about right versus left. It was about power, how it's used, who holds it, and who gets to define the narrative. And what about Karoline? Was this a calculated strategy? Or was it pure instinct? An unforgiving reaction to years of being belittled, undermined, and dismissed? You're about to find out. This story isn't just about politics. It's about standing your ground when the world is waiting for you to fall. It's about claiming back your dignity when others have tried to tear you down. And when the dust settles, you'll see exactly how karma delivered the ultimate justice. But first, let's dig deeper into what led to this epic moment. What's the backstory? What was it that truly fueled Karoline Leavitt's explosive takedown of these liberal reporters? For years, Karoline Leavitt had been a quiet force, observing, analyzing, and learning the unspoken rules of the political game. She wasn't someone who demanded attention. In fact, she preferred to keep her head down, working tirelessly behind the scenes. But all of that changed when she found herself thrust into the spotlight, not because she sought it, but because she had no choice. The political landscape was changing, and with it the stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't long before Karoline found herself up against a media establishment that seemed untouchable. Liberal reporters, armed with their years of experience and powerful connections, had long enjoyed a dominant position. They weren't just reporters. They were gatekeepers deciding who would be heard and who would be silenced. They wielded power in ways most people couldn't even comprehend. And Karoline? She was just another politician, one of many trying to make a name for herself in a system stacked against her. But she wasn't like the others. She had the kind of fire that couldn't be extinguished by a few poorly worded interviews or hostile reporters. Her mistake wasn't in believing she could win. They all made that mistake. The real mistake was in underestimating her. The liberal reporters believed they were the ones in control, that their carefully crafted narratives would always hold sway. But they failed to see Karoline's resolve, her quiet strength that had been building up over the years. It all came to a head during a heated live broadcast. The tension in the air was palpable, as the reporters, confident in their own superiority, grilled Karoline with questions they believed would rattle her. They poked at her political views, twisted her words, and tried to paint her as nothing more than another right-wing extremist. But what they didn't realize was that their game was already over. They had made a critical error. They had underestimated her resilience. The injustice wasn't just in the way they treated Karoline. It was in the system that allowed it. A system where power was consolidated in the hands of a few, where voices were suppressed unless they conformed to a certain narrative. Karoline's journey wasn't about rising to power. It was about survival. And it was a struggle millions of people could relate to. The struggle of being dismissed, belittled, and ignored simply because you didn't fit into someone else's ideal image of what success should look like. It's a struggle that millions face every single day, whether in politics, the workplace, or social circles. The reporters, armed with their polished personas and elitist attitudes, saw themselves as the final word in every conversation. They believed they were entitled to dominate the narrative, to dictate who was worthy of respect and who wasn't. They thought they could use their platform to destroy anyone who didn't fit within their narrow worldview. But in doing so, they had exposed their own hypocrisy. In trying to tear Karoline down, they had created the perfect storm. They had pushed too far, and now they were about to find out just how costly that mistake would be. This wasn't just an attack on Karoline. It was an attack on everyone who had ever felt the sting of being judged unfairly. The millions who were told they didn't belong, that their voices didn't matter. The powerful media machine that used its influence to silence those it deemed unworthy. This was a moment when the tables were about to turn. Karoline wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been made to feel small, dismissed, and unheard. As the camera rolled and the reporters continued to spew their venom, the wall started to close in around them. They thought they were in control, but what they didn't realize was that their carefully constructed world was beginning to unravel. The injustice of the moment was undeniable. Karoline wasn't just another politician. They had underestimated her. And in doing so, they had set the stage for a spectacular showdown that would leave them gasping for air. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when Karoline Leavitt believed in the system, in the idea that if you played by the rules, things would eventually work out. Like so many others, she had once thought that hard work and perseverance would always be enough to overcome any obstacle. But over time, the weight of constant dismissal, the snide comments, the condescending smiles from the very people who believed they held all the power, had begun to take its toll. The reporters, with their polished questions and superior airs, had always believed they could crush anyone who wasn't one of them. Karoline was no different. In their eyes, she was a lightweight, someone whose political beliefs were easily dismissed with a few pointed jabs, and for a while she had believed them. She had believed that she was just another face in the crowd, that her voice would never truly matter in the cacophony of louder, more established voices. But then, something changed. It happened slowly at first, an awareness that began to flicker in the back of her mind. Karoline started to question her place in this world. Why was she allowing herself to be painted into a corner by people who didn't understand her, let alone respect her? Why was she letting them define her? With each passing interview, each moment of being made to feel small, something inside her began to break. But it wasn't a weakness, it was a turning point. One late evening, after yet another round of dismissive comments from the media, Karoline sat in her office, staring at the reflection in the window. Her thoughts were a storm. The weight of it all, the years of being underestimated, had begun to chip away at her. She had played by the rules, but the rules had only been designed to keep her down. They weren't made for someone like her. They were made for people who understood the unspoken power dynamics of the media elite, for people who knew how to play the game. But Karoline wasn't willing to be a pawn any longer. The breaking moment arrived when she heard the whispers. "They're just going to keep attacking you. You're just a stepping stone for their agenda," her advisor had warned her. Those words hit harder than any critique or headline ever could. She had always tried to keep her composure, tried to play the part of the professional, the politician who smiled through the criticism. But the truth, the cold reality, was impossible to ignore now. She was being used. She wasn't just being dismissed. She was being manipulated. And it was time to stop playing their game. Her mind raced as the decision grew clearer. This wasn't just about standing up for herself anymore. It was about something bigger. The media, the reporters, the power they held. They thought they were untouchable. But Karoline had learned that power wasn't just about being loud or having the right connections. Power was about control. And control could be seized in a moment. The moment when everyone believed you were at your lowest point, when they thought they had finally broken you. That was when they were most vulnerable. It was time to turn the tables. The reporters had been feeding off her responses, each one more calculated than the last, drawing her deeper into their narrative, making her seem as though she was the one at fault. But Karoline realized something critical. The more they provoked her, the more they played into her hands. Every jab, every attempt to discredit her only gave her more ammunition. They were digging their own graves without even realizing it. The next live interview was just around the corner, and the tension inside Karoline was almost unbearable. She stood backstage, pacing, running through the questions she knew were coming. It felt like the calm before the storm. Her heart raced with anticipation, but she wasn't afraid. She was focused. She knew what she had to do. She would not be a victim any longer. As the lights flickered on and the cameras started rolling, she took her seat across from the reporters. The familiar faces, with their judgmental smiles and high-handed rhetoric, were ready to deliver their usual attack. This time, however, they were about to meet something they hadn't expected. They were about to see the real Karoline, stronger, sharper, and more dangerous than they could have imagined. The first question came, dripping with sarcasm, aimed at undermining her stance on a key political issue. She responded with grace, but the undertone was clear. This wasn't a debate to her. It was a battlefield. Each word she spoke was carefully crafted, not just to answer their question, but to dismantle their narrative piece by piece. But what no one expected was the moment she turned the tables. A reporter, confident in their ability to manipulate, asked a question meant to discredit her with an inflammatory tone. Instead of defending herself, Karoline's eyes narrowed, and she took a breath that seemed to shift the entire atmosphere. She wasn't going to react emotionally. She wasn't going to let them frame her. She smiled. A smile that carried the weight of all the years of dismissal, all the years of being underestimated, and responded with an insight that left the reporters momentarily speechless. It wasn't just a witty comeback. It was a calculated strike, a moment where she refused to let the media have control over her narrative any longer. This was her story now, and the tables were beginning to turn. The power was shifting, and the reporters were finally realizing they had underestimated her once again. It was a moment of reflection, a realization that everything had led to this. Karoline wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, that their voice didn't matter. And in that moment, as the tension built, Karoline Leavitt made her choice. She would not back down. She would stand tall, and she would fight back. The live broadcast that followed Karoline's quiet yet fierce retort wasn't supposed to be this way. The liberal reporters had anticipated another round of uncomfortable questions, their voices dripping with superiority. They were prepared to play their usual game, try to break down their guest with loaded questions, knowing they had the power to control the conversation. But what they didn't anticipate was Karoline's composure, her refusal to follow the script they had written for her. It all started with a question designed to undermine her credibility. The reporter, looking smug, asked Karoline about a previous, controversial statement she had made, one that had been twisted and amplified by the media in an attempt to discredit her. But this time, Karoline wasn't caught off guard. She knew exactly what was coming. She had anticipated this very moment, and in the back of her mind she had already prepared for it. She leaned forward, making eye contact with the reporter, and in the calmest voice, she addressed the accusation. "You're right," she said. "That statement was taken out of context, but what you failed to mention was the context in which it was made." The reporter blinked, caught off guard by her confident response. The audience could feel the shift. Karoline wasn't cowering, she wasn't backpedaling. Instead, she was in control of the conversation. The question that was meant to paint her as a political outsider, out of touch and reckless, had backfired. Karoline had turned it into a point of strength, revealing that the media had manipulated the truth. And then, in a move no one could have expected, Karoline delivered the bombshell. She had been holding on to a secret, a piece of information that could expose the very reporters who had been pushing her into this corner for so long. In a single moment, she dropped the truth that they had desperately tried to bury. "I have the full transcript of that conversation," she said, "and if you'd like, I can share it with your audience right now." The reporters froze. The audience, too, was silent. The air felt charged, thick with anticipation. Karoline wasn't just responding to an accusation. She was setting the stage for an explosion. The hidden power, the knowledge she had been quietly collecting over time, was now in the open. The reporters had thought they were in charge, that they were the ones pulling the strings. But now, the strings were in her hands, and they were about to unravel. The reporter who had been so confident just moments ago suddenly seemed small, almost fragile. The facade of authority that they had so carefully constructed started to crack. The power dynamic had shifted, the tables had been turned, and it was clear that Karoline wasn't the one who was cornered anymore. She had not only defended herself, but had exposed the very forces trying to manipulate the narrative. But it wasn't just about the revelation of the transcripts. It was the way Karoline delivered it, with precision, with purpose. She didn't lash out in anger or make sweeping accusations. She simply spoke the truth, calmly, firmly, and without hesitation. She had revealed the hidden strength that had been building within her all along. The media had underestimated her once again, assuming she was just another politician with a fleeting moment in the spotlight. They didn't realize that Karoline was playing a much longer game. The stakes had never been higher. The reporters had spent years building their reputation, carefully cultivating their image as the voices of authority in the political world. They had believed they were untouchable, that no one could ever challenge them. But now, they were the ones who were on the defensive. And as Karoline spoke, the audience began to see the cracks in the reporter's armor. The tension in the studio was palpable. Karoline's calm, controlled demeanor stood in stark contrast to the reporter's growing panic. They had tried to humiliate her, but now, the reversal was so stark that it was almost surreal. Their control, once so absolute, was slipping through their fingers. They had underestimated the power of a single individual, someone who had quietly gathered the truth piece by piece and waited for the perfect moment to reveal it. In that moment, the reporters knew they had lost. The control they once held over the narrative was crumbling before their eyes, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The audience was no longer watching a simple interview. They were witnessing the unmasking of the media elite, a carefully orchestrated system of power that had been exposed by the very person they had tried to break. The emotional stakes skyrocketed. What had started as a typical political interview had evolved into something much bigger. It was no longer just about Karoline's career or the reporter's agenda. It was about justice. It was about truth. And it was about the power of one person to stand up against a system that had for so long felt invincible. As the broadcast continued, Karoline didn't just win the moment. She reshaped the entire conversation. The reporters who had come into the interview with the upper hand were now scrambling. Their questions had lost their bite. Their words lost their weight. Karoline's words had taken their place, and they resonated with a force that no one had expected. The moment of truth had arrived, and Karoline Leavitt was no longer the underdog. She had become the embodiment of everything the media had tried to suppress. The reversal was complete, and the reporters were left to pick up the pieces of the narrative they thought they controlled. The power had shifted, and Karoline was standing at the center of it all. In the days following that explosive live broadcast, the fallout was swift and unforgiving. What had begun as a simple political interview quickly transformed into a media storm of unprecedented proportions. The liberal reporters, once celebrated as the gatekeepers of truth, found themselves in the midst of a scandal that would shake the very foundation of their credibility. Karoline Leavitt had, in one move, dismantled the illusion of power they had so carefully cultivated. Their world of untouchable authority was crumbling, exposed for what it was. A manufactured narrative designed to keep certain voices suppressed while elevating others. And now, they were the ones facing the consequences of their actions. It didn't take long for the story to spread. News outlets, independent journalists, and commentators all weighed in on the stunning reversal that had taken place. The transcripts Karoline had referenced were made public, and they revealed the extent to which the media had distorted the truth to fit their own agenda. What was once dismissed as a trivial mistake was now a full-scale scandal. The reporters, who had built their careers on shaping public opinion, were now the subjects of an investigation into journalistic ethics and integrity, but the real justice came in the form of the audience's reaction. The viewers who had watched the interview unfold live began to pour in their support for Karoline. Social media exploded with messages of solidarity. People from all walks of life, tired of being manipulated by those in power, stood behind her. She became a symbol of resistance, a voice for those who had long been silenced by the media elite. The very reporters who had once mocked her found themselves besieged by public outcry. Their credibility was in tatters, their influence evaporating, in the face of the truth Karoline had so effortlessly exposed. As the days wore on, Karoline's campaign for political office gained momentum. The scandal surrounding the reporters had not only strengthened her position, but had also propelled her into the spotlight in a way that no one had expected. Her campaign rallies were filled with passionate supporters, many of whom had once felt that they didn't have a voice in the political process. Karoline had given them that voice. She had shown them that standing up against injustice, no matter how powerful the opposition, could yield results. The media, in their attempt to discredit her, had inadvertently given her the platform she needed. They had underestimated her resilience, her ability to navigate the system, and most importantly, her unwavering commitment to the truth. In the end, it was their arrogance, their belief that they were untouchable, that had led to their downfall. And Karoline was there, standing tall, to witness it all unfold. But perhaps the most poetic aspect of this entire saga was the realization that Karoline had never needed to seek revenge. She hadn't fired back with vicious attacks or petty insults. Instead, she had allowed the truth to speak for itself. Karma had already delivered its justice, and the satisfaction came not from the destruction of her enemies, but from the undeniable power of righteousness. The reporters had lost everything: credibility, trust, and their grip on the narrative. They had tried to tear Karoline down, but in doing so, they had exposed their own flaws, their own biases, and their own corruption. They had humiliated themselves in front of the very audience they had once believed they controlled. And as they faced the fallout of their actions, it became clear that they would never be able to recover. The damage had been done, and it was irreversible. Meanwhile, Karoline walked away from the battle with something far greater than a momentary victory. She had reclaimed her dignity, her voice, and her sense of purpose. She had shown the world that no matter how powerful the forces of media and manipulation may seem, there is always room for truth to prevail. And in a world that so often rewards the loudest voices, Karoline's calm, measured response had spoken volumes. As she stood before her supporters at a rally, her voice steady and strong, Karoline shared a final message with the crowd. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about all of us. This is about refusing to let anyone define us, to tell us that our voices don't matter. We've seen what happens when those in power believe they can control the narrative. But we've also seen that the truth always has a way of coming to light. No one is untouchable. No one can silence us." The crowd erupted in applause. The energy in the air electric. The fight wasn't over, but Karoline had already won the most important battle, the battle for integrity. She had proven that in the face of overwhelming odds, it's not the loudest or most powerful who ultimately succeed. It's the ones who refuse to back down, who remain steadfast in their commitment to what is right. The reporters, the supposed giants of the media world, had been toppled by the very truth they had worked so hard to suppress. And as Karoline's message spread across the nation, it became clear that a new era was dawning, one where the power of truth would reign supreme. She didn't need revenge, because justice had already been served. The media lost everything, while Karoline walked away with something far greater. She walked away with the respect of the people, the dignity she had always maintained, and the knowledge that, in the end, it was the truth that had won, and the lesson they would never forget. Power may be temporary, but integrity lasts forever.